The flood came on the third night of the summer rains, and it came fast. I had seen the Delvara River rise before. Every alpha who had ruled this delta kingdom had seen it, the wide brown water climbing its banks in the heat season, swallowing the reed marshes at the southern border, pushing the watchtowers ankle-deep before it pulled back and left silt and silence. I had been born in those watchtowers. I had learned to judge the river's temper by the smell of the wind off the estuary, and for 20 years I had been right about when to pull the wolves back from the lower pastures and when to leave them. I was wrong that night. The rains had come heavier than any summer I remembered, and the levee at the first bend broke at midnight without warning. By the time my border watch Captain Doran sent the signal fire, the lower marshes were gone. 3 of my senior wolves were already downriver, working the overnight patrol route. I hadn't yet pulled them off, and by the time we reached the south watchtower on horseback, 2 more had been swept in trying to reach them. 5 wolves in the Delvara current in the dark. That current could take a horse. I stood on the tower walk and watched the lanterns moving in the reeds below. My men, doing what they could with ropes and poles, and I knew the honest count. The fast water was 400 meters wide at the bending channel. We had 3 men who could swim in this current, and the night was giving back nothing. 1 wolf had made it to the north reed bank on his own. The others I did not yet know. It was Doran who pointed her out, not knowing I was watching. "Still at it," he said to the man beside him, not to me. He hadn't heard me climb the tower stairs. "The flood walker. She's been in and out since before the second bell." I looked where he was pointing. In the amber spill of the nearest lantern, at the bend where the current slackened behind a crook of half-submerged willow, a woman was wading, not standing at the edge, not testing the water with one careful foot. She was in it to her waist, moving sideways against the pull with the deliberate patience of someone who had done this before, and she was holding something, pulling something, and when the lantern caught the shape of it, I saw it was a wolf. Full-grown, sodden, its legs working weakly against the current. She had one arm across its chest, and she was moving both of them toward the reed bank, step by step, with a steadiness that had no business existing in that water. She reached the shallows. She walked the wolf up onto the flat mud, crouched over it, checked its legs, its breathing. The wolf turned its head and pressed its muzzle briefly to the inside of her wrist. Then she stood, looked back at the river and waded back in. "Who is she?" I said. Doran startled. He hadn't known I was behind him. He straightened and gave me the look my men gave me when they had a dismissive answer ready and were deciding whether to offer it. "Nobody, my lord. One of the border settlement women. She's been coming to the lower bank since the rain started, pulling strays out of the lower channel. We don't know whose wolves they were. She hasn't asked. She just does it and goes." "Nobody," I said. "She lives in the settlement near the second reed crossing. They call her the flood walker. I think it's meant as an insult, my lord." I watched her go back into the water. "Does she know whose pack territory this is?" "I don't know that she cares, my lord." I stood there in the dark for a long time. I had a kingdom to manage, 5 wolves in the water, levee damage at the first bend, a patrol circuit to reroute. I had 100 things that required the Alpha King of Delvara to be somewhere that was not the South Watchtower, watching a woman with no rank mark and no pack brand wade into a killing current for the 3rd time in 1 hour. I stayed. She pulled out 2 more before the second bell of the night sounded. One of them I recognized, Pell, a 6-year-old male who had been on the overnight circuit, and who was difficult at the best of times, who had once bitten 3 of my handlers on introduction, and had refused to accept any human touch since. Pell came out of the current in her arms with his nose buried against her collarbone, his feet paddling weakly, and he let her lay him on the mud and run her hands down his sides, checking, and he did not so much as pull his lip back. He leaned into her hands. I had never in 6 years of working with Pell seen him, except a human touch. I said nothing, I watched. She went back in twice more before the water changed. The current picked up as the second levee failed somewhere upriver and the push grew mean, and I watched her feel it change, pause, judge it, and walk back out. She knew when to stop. She sat on the mud of the reed bank and wrung water out of her sleeve and looked at the wolves she had pulled out, 3 of them, now resting in the reeds, and she put her hand briefly on the nearest one's flank, something between a reassurance and a farewell, and then she stood and walked toward the settlement path. She didn't look at the watchtower. She didn't look for anyone to see her. She didn't ask for anything. Doran had come back to stand beside me. "She won't take coin," he said, in the tone of a man reporting a minor administrative difficulty. "Devrin tried this morning. She gave him back the money and walked away." I watched her disappear into the dark between the willows. I thought about the way Pell had pressed his nose to her collarbone. I thought about something that had shifted, very quietly, at the base of my sternum when she walked back into the river for the 3rd time. Not a sound, not a pull. Something more like the sensation of a room you have been in all your life suddenly becoming a different size, as though the walls had moved an inch and the air had changed, and you were not sure yet what it meant. I had heard other alpha kings describe the mate mark waking. My father had told me once that it felt like the moment before a storm, not the lightning, not the rain, just the change in pressure that tells every living thing something is coming. I had always assumed that description was meant to be poetic. I understood it now. I understood it, and I said nothing, and I told Doran to double the river watch and went to find somewhere to think. The second night I came back. I told myself I came back for the remaining wolves. 2 were still unaccounted for after the first night. The current had been too fast and too wide, and my men had tracked them to the deeper channel but could not get them in. I came back because 2 of my pack's wolves were still in the water. That was a reasonable and entirely sufficient reason for the Alpha King of Delvara to spend the night at the South Watchtower. I also came back because I wanted to see if she would return. She did. She arrived before the lanterns were lit, while the last of the day was still a bronze stain above the reed line. She came from the settlement path carrying a length of braided rope coiled over one shoulder and a clay jar of something. A salve, I would later understand, that she applied to the wolves' paws where the current had worn them. She set both things on a dry shelf of mud above the water line, and she looked at the river for a long time with the quiet attention of a woman reading something written in a language she knew well. Then she tied the rope to the old willow root that had been there since before my father's time, tested the knot 3 times with 2 hands, and waded in. I was on the tower walk again. I had not told Doran I was coming. I had come quietly with 2 of my personal guard, and I had told them to stay at the base of the tower. I watched alone. The second night the water was lower by 1/2 meter, but the silt was worse. The current was pushing debris now, whole branches, pieces of the levee boards, and navigating it required a different kind of patience. She had it. She moved through the debris with her arms up, deflecting, and she found the deeper channel where my men had lost the scent trail, and she worked her way along it, and 20 minutes in she went under. My hands went to the tower rail. She came back up 8 meters downstream, coughing, still moving. She'd gone under deliberately. I realized it a moment later, because the wolf she was looking for was caught below a debris snag, and the only way to reach him was from underneath. She went down again, and she came up with the wolf's forepaw in her grip, and she worked him loose from the snag, and she brought him in. That was Fen, the 5th wolf. He had been in the water for 30 hours. He was barely moving when she laid him on the mud, and she spent 20 minutes over him in the lantern light, her hands on his chest, her ear against his ribs, checking his breathing, checking his heart, applying the salve to his paws with the same businesslike care she'd shown every wolf she'd pulled out. Fenn's eyes were open. He watched her face from inches away, and his tail, which should have had no strength left in it, moved once, slowly, against the mud. She noticed. She put her hand very gently on top of his head, just for a moment. Then she sat back on her heels and looked out at the river because she was already counting, checking, looking for the one that was still out there. Doran appeared at my shoulder. He'd come up the stairs while I was watching. "My lord," he said quietly, "my men say there's one more in the lower channel, the old male. He's been caught behind the East Reed Island since this morning. We can see him, but the current between here and there is too fast for anyone we have." The old male. My father's wolf, Kedron, 19 years old, the oldest wolf in the Delvara pack, gray-muzzled now and slow, who had been on the patrol circuit because he refused to retire no matter how many times I'd tried to reassign him to the quieter work. Kedron, who had sat at my father's feet during every council and sat at mine since the day I took the alpha seat, who was at this moment caught on the East Reed Island in the dark with the fast water between him and the bank, and who, by the honest count of age and hours in the cold current, may have been dying. I had been about to go in myself. I had weighed it and decided the political cost of an alpha king pulled under by his own river was worth it. Kedron was my father's. But she had already seen him. She was standing at the waterline again, her rope in her hands, looking at the East Reed Island. In the lantern light, I watched her judge the distance. I watched her look at the debris in the fast channel between. I watched her make the face of a woman solving a problem, not afraid, not reckless, but genuinely working through the approach with the focus of a craftsman. She tied one end of the rope to the willow root. The other end she tied around her own waist. Then she walked into the fast water. I gripped the rail. She moved across the shallow part fast, using the current's help where it served her and cutting sideways across it where it didn't. And when she hit the deep channel, she went low in the water, nearly horizontal, pulling along the rope to keep from being taken, hand over hand. And she made it through in something that felt like 40 years to me and was probably closer to 3 minutes. She came up on the Reed Island, and she went directly to Kedron. I could see his shape on the island hunched, his gray head down, his legs trembling. He was alive, but he'd been on that island alone since morning and the water had worn him, and a wolf of 19 years does not have the reserves of a younger one. She crouched beside him and she put both hands on him and she talked to him. I was too far away to hear the words. I do not know what she said. But Kedron, who had seen 19 winters, who had carried my father's grief when my mother died, who was the most dignified animal I had ever known. Kedron pressed his whole gray face against her chest and stayed there. After a moment she stood, she got him up. She walked him to the water's edge and she got one arm across his chest, the way she had carried every wolf out, and she untied the rope from her waist and retied it through his collar so that the rope would take his weight rather than hers if the current took them, which meant if they went under, he would come up and she might not. She'd done the math on that. She'd done it calmly, and she'd made the choice and she'd tied the knot. I was already moving, down the tower stairs. Doran was behind me and my 2 guards, all of us moving for the bank. She didn't see us. She was already in the water. The crossing back was harder. Kedron was heavier, older, and the river was fighting both of them. She went under once with him. The debris caught her shoulder and pushed her down, and I saw the rope go taut, and I saw her come up on the wrong side of it, gasping, and she pulled them both back onto line without losing Kedron's collar for a single second. My boots were in the shallows. I was in the water before she reached me. She looked up and saw a man she didn't know, and she didn't flinch. She looked at the wolf in her arms, and then she looked at me with the expression of someone making a rapid, practical decision about assistance, and she held out Kedron to me. I took him. I carried him to the bank. He was lighter than I expected and heavier than I could bear, the old familiar weight of him, his gray muzzle against my chest. She waded in behind me. She came out of the water and she sat down on the flat mud bank and she caught her breath. And then she stood up and came over and crouched beside Kedron, and began checking him with the same systematic care she had applied to every wolf she'd brought out: his breathing, his legs, his paws. And she didn't ask me who I was, and she didn't wait for permission. "He's cold," she said. Her voice was even, practical, the voice of a woman in the middle of work. "He needs to be warm before he sleeps, or he won't wake up. Do your men have blankets at the watchtower?" "Yes," I said. "Then go get one," she said, without looking up from Kedron. I heard Doran draw a sharp breath behind me. I went and got the blanket. By the time I came back, Kedron's breathing had deepened. She had positioned his body and his legs in a particular way, knees bent under him, not splayed, and she had her hands working through his wet fur along the channels she had clearly learned or intuited, pressing the water out of the coat toward the surface. When I laid the blanket over him, she tucked it with the precision of a woman who had done this many times. Kedron sighed, a sound I had not heard from him in years, the long, slow release of a body finally allowed to rest. She sat back, looked at the river, looked at the wolves she had pulled out over 2 nights, most of them resting in the reeds or on the mud of the bank, their shapes dark and quiet in the lantern light. 6 wolves. 6 in 2 nights, from a current that had defeated every swimmer my watch had to offer. She picked up her clay jar and her rope, the same way she had arrived. "Wait," I said. She stopped. She looked at me with a patience that had nothing servile in it, not the patience of someone waiting for a lord to speak, but the patience of a woman who had not yet decided whether this conversation was worth her time. "My name is Kaelin," I said. "I'm the Alpha King of Delvara." The expression on her face did not change in the way most people's faces changed when I said that. There was a brief reassessment, not fear, not performance, just a rapid and honest accounting of new information. Then she said, "The wolves are in good condition. The old one will need a few days of warmth and quiet. He's not as badly hurt as he looks." "I know," I said. "He's 19 years old and made of stubbornness." The corner of her mouth moved. "Older than he looks then." "Older than anyone gives him credit for," I said. "My name is Kaelin. What's yours?" A pause, a slight wariness, the wariness of a woman who had given her name before and found it used as a handle to be dismissed by. "Myra," she said. "Myra," I said. "Where did you learn to read the Delvara current that well?" The question surprised her, not an insult, an actual question. She looked at me for a moment with the attention of someone deciding whether the question was genuine. It was. She could apparently tell. "I grew up in the First Bend settlement," she said. "The current there comes under the dock, not around it. You learn it young, or you learn it badly." "You tied the rope through his collar," I said, "so that he would come up if the current took you both." She said nothing to that. "You made that decision calmly," I said, "before you went in." "It was the right knot for the job," she said, and something in her voice made it plain she did not consider this a remarkable statement. I stood in the dark at the edge of the Delvara River with the lantern light catching the water still streaming from her hair, and I felt, for the second time in my life, what my father had tried to describe. The change in pressure, the walls of the room moving. The difference was that this time it was not small and quiet. This time it arrived with the specific, certain weight of something that had been moving toward me for a long time. Something I had not known was coming until it was already here. Behind me in the reeds I heard Kedron move, the shuffle of an old wolf getting more comfortable in his blanket, and then very slowly and then faster and then all of them as though they had made a single decision. Every wolf she had pulled from the river turned toward her. Not toward me, toward her. They oriented to her the way wolves orient to a North Star, with the completeness of creatures who have found their fixed point, and they held it. Pell, who bit handlers. Fen, who had almost drowned. All of them, pointing at her in the dark like a compass, finding its reading. Myra looked at them. Then she looked at me, and something crossed her face, not triumph, not expectation, just a quiet bewilderment, as though she was not accustomed to being pointed at. The mark on my left wrist, the mate mark that had been there, pale and faint, since the day I was born, that I had carried for 38 years without it ever waking, began to burn. Not painfully, not the way you burn from a fire, the way you burn when something cold and long dormant warms for the first time, from the inside out and steady, and entirely without drama, as though it had simply been waiting for the correct conditions. I looked down at my wrist. The mark was glowing, faintly in the dark, a light the color of amber river water in lantern light. I heard Doran make a sound I had never heard from him before. I looked at Myra. She was looking at my wrist. I would like to tell you I said something worthy of the moment, something a king should say. I would like to tell you I had words ready, that 38 years of carrying that mark had prepared me for the occasion of its waking, that I knew exactly the right way to explain to a woman standing soaking wet on a mud bank at 2 in the morning that the fated mate bond I had carried my whole life had just recognized her. I had no such words. What I said was, I know this is a great deal of information at one time. She looked at me, then she looked at the wolves still oriented toward her, then she looked at the mark on my wrist, then she looked at the river. Then she looked back at me with the expression of a woman, running a very fast and very thorough accounting. Is it going to stop burning? She said. I don't know, I said honestly. It's the first time. First time for what? The mark has never woken before. I've been carrying it for 38 years. She took this in, and it chose now. It appears to have been waiting, I said, for the correct conditions. She was quiet for a long time. Behind her, Kedron shifted in his blanket and put his old gray head down on his paws, and the river moved past in the dark, and somewhere in the reed bed, a night heron called once and was still. I'm nobody, she said, not with bitterness, with the precision of a woman offering accurate information. I'm from the second crossing settlement and I have no pack mark and I've never had a rank. People in the border villages, they call me the Flood Walker. It's not a compliment. I know, I said, Doran told me. Then you know I'm not, she stopped, looked for the word. The sort of woman a king's mate mark wakes for, I said. She met my eyes, direct, undeceived. Yes. I thought about how to say what I needed to say. I was not a man who generally had difficulty speaking plainly. I had been speaking plainly as Alpha King for 20 years, but there was something in the specificity of this moment that required me to be more careful than usual. Not careful in the sense of evasive, careful in the sense of exact. The mark, I said, does not take rank into account. It takes one thing into account, and I have come to understand tonight that I have been watching what that thing is for 2 nights without knowing I was watching it. I paused. A woman who ties the rope through the old wolf's collar so that he comes up if the current takes them. A woman who goes back in for the difficult wolf, the one who bites every handler he's ever had and brings him out holding him like something worth protecting. A woman who doesn't ask who the wolves belong to and doesn't ask for anything in return and goes home before the lanterns are even lit. I stopped. The mark is not wrong, Myra. I have spent 38 years wondering what it was waiting for. I know now. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, the Flood Walker. Yes, I said. They mean it as an insult, she said. In the settlement, the other women don't talk to me. They say I draw disaster to me, that I'm always where the bad weather is. They say if I'm standing in your field it means a storm is coming. You were standing in my river, I said, and a storm was already here. She looked at me. Every wolf you pulled out is breathing, I said. Pell has not let a human touch him in 6 years. He came out of that current with his nose against your neck. I looked at her steadily. Kedron is going to see 20 winters. I didn't believe that was possible before tonight. Something shifted in her face. Not the large movements of expression, the small ones. The kind that means something has reached a place that words usually don't. I don't know what I'm supposed to say to this, she said. You don't have to say anything tonight, I said. The river is lower. The remaining wolves are safe. You've been in the water for 2 nights running and you need to sleep. I paused. But I want to ask you something first. She waited. Tomorrow, when my border watch captain makes his morning report to the settlement council, and when he tells them that the wolves pulled from the flood were the Alpha King's pack wolves, I want to be there when he tells them. And I want you to be there as well. Because the council will ask who pulled them out, and I am going to tell them exactly who. She understood what I was saying. I watched her understand it. The council, the settlement elders, and the border watch leadership was the formal body that assigned rank and recognition in the Southern Territories. A mark of recognition from that body, in front of witnesses, was binding. You don't have to do that, she said. I want to do it, I said. There's a difference. Another silence. The night around us was very quiet now, the river running lower, the wolves resting, the lanterns burning steady. I could feel the mark on my wrist still warm. My lord, said Doran from a careful distance. He had been standing behind me the whole time and I had mostly forgotten he was there. It's late. The lady will need. Doran, I said. My lord. What is the floodwalker's name? A pause. Myra, my lord. She's from the second. The next time you speak of her in any report to me or to anyone else, you will call her by her name, I said. Not the floodwalker, not nobody, her name. I turned back to Myra, if that's acceptable to you. She looked at me with the wariness still there, the careful measurement of a woman who had learned that power offered was often power used differently than promised. I did not look away from it. I let her look. All right, she said. My name then. Good, I said. She picked up her rope and her clay jar. Then she looked at the wolves one more time, the sweep of them, 6 shapes resting in the reeds and on the mud, and something in her face went quiet and certain. The look of a person who has done the right thing and knows it without needing to be told. Kedron will want warm broth in the morning, she said. Plain, nothing salted. His kidneys have been under stress. I'll make sure of it, I said. She walked away down the settlement path without looking back. I watched her go. Doran moved to my shoulder. He was quiet for a moment that had a particular quality, the quality of a man choosing his words with care around an alpha who has just experienced something large. My lord, he said, with a restraint I gave him credit for. The mark. Yes, I said. Is it certain? I looked at my wrist. The amber glow had not faded. The warmth was settled, constant, the way a fire settles when it stops catching and starts burning clean. Yes, I said. Doran was quiet again. Then carefully, the settlement council meets at the 3rd bell. I know. I can arrange a private hearing, if... No, I said, no private hearing, full council, all witnesses, I want everyone there. Another silence. She's from the 2nd crossing settlement, Doran said. No pack mark, no rank. The council members, 2 of them were in the party that tried to drive her out of the settlement 2 years ago. They called her a storm bringer. I know, I said. They will have opinions. They can keep them, I said, to themselves. The settlement council met at the 3rd bell of the following morning in the South Watchtower's ground hall, which was large enough for the 12 council members, the Border Watch senior staff, and the representatives of the 3 nearest settlements. I had sent word the night before, not invitation, instruction, and I arrived at the 2nd bell and waited. Myra arrived at the 3rd bell exactly. She had slept and changed into dry clothes, and she wore her hair the way she always wore it, pulled back, functional, and she walked into that hall with the same quality of attention she brought to the river, measuring, unafraid, not performing any of the deference the hall expected from a woman without rank. I watched the council see her come in. I watched the specific face of Elder Varath, who had been one of the 2 who moved to drive her from the settlement 2 years ago, the slight adjustment of his expression, the settling of his certainty. In this hall, in these chairs, with 12 men who held the formal authority of the Southern Border Council, he knew which way this would go. He was about to learn differently. I let Doran make the opening report. The flood, the levees, the wolves, all of it. I watched the council's faces as the numbers landed. 6 wolves recovered, from a current that had defeated every trained swimmer the Border Watch had available. Then Doran said, the wolves were recovered by a resident of the Second Crossing settlement, acting alone over 2 nights. Elder Vareth looked up. Her name is Myra, Doran said, and I heard in his voice the particular sound of a man who has been corrected by his alpha and has absorbed the correction fully. She carried the wolves out of the Delvara current one by one. 6 rescues in 2 nights, including the recovery of Kedron, the senior wolf from the East Reed Island, against the full secondary current. He paused. All 6 wolves are in good condition this morning. Silence. Vareth recovered first. The floodwalk, he stopped, looked at me. The woman Myra, she is not pack-marked, she is not a trained. No, I said. I stood. In the hall, that was enough to stop him. The alpha standing is the alpha speaking, and every man in the room knew it. She is not pack-marked. She carries no rank. She came to the river because the river needed her and she knew how to answer it. I let that sit for a moment. She also recovered Kedron, the oldest wolf in the Delvara pack, from a position that none of my trained swimmers could reach, and she tied the recovery rope through his collar so that if the current took them both, he would surface and she would not. Vareth's mouth was open. I was at the watchtower, I said. I watched her do it. I looked at the hall, all 12 council members, the Border Watch staff, the settlement representatives, every one of them. 2 years ago, I said, some members of this council moved to expel this woman from the Second Crossing settlement on the grounds that she drew bad weather. I held Vareth's gaze. 2 years ago, at the time of the cold month storm, she was, as I understand it, in the process of pulling 4 settlement dogs out of a flooded culvert while the expulsion papers were being drafted. I paused. She draws neither bad weather nor good. She goes where the current takes the things that need her, and she brings them out. The hall was very still. I am also standing here this morning, I said, because last night, while she was bringing Kedron in from the East Reed Island, the mate mark I have carried for 38 years woke for the first time in my life. The silence was different now. There are 12 of you in this hall, I said. Some of you have known me for 20 years. Some of you were at the alpha seat when I received this mark at birth. You know what it means when it wakes. You know it does not make errors. Vareth had gone the color of old clay. I am telling you before this council and before these witnesses, I said, that Myra of the Second Crossing settlement is my fated mate. I am telling you before this council that I am claiming her as Luna of the Delvara pack, if she will have me. I turned to look at her. If she will have me. She was standing to my right, 3 paces back, where the hall's protocol placed a person without rank. She had listened to all of it without moving. Her face was doing the thing it did, the careful, private accounting, the rapid and honest internal calculation. I waited. The hall waited. You watched for 2 nights, she said, and you didn't stop me. No, I said, I watched. You could have sent men in. None of them could have done what you were doing. I wasn't willing to disrupt something that was working. That's a very practical answer. I'm a practical man, I said, about most things, not as it turns out about this. I stopped. I have spent 38 years carrying that mark and telling myself it would wake when it was ready. Last night it was ready. The reason it was ready, I said, is the woman standing in this hall who tied the rope through the old wolf's collar before she went into the fast water. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, yes. One word, quiet, certain, unhurried. The same word she would use to answer a practical question about a river. Yes, the current is passable. Yes, the knot will hold. Yes. I crossed the 3 paces between us. I took her hand. Behind me in the hall, I heard it, the sound that had no individual component you could point to, the collective shifting and settling and realignment of a room full of people recalibrating what they had believed. Vareth had sat back in his chair. The border watch captain on his left had stood up, the way you stood for a Luna. The settlement representative on the far right, a woman who had been at the second crossing settlement for 40 years, had her hand pressed to her mouth. One by one the hall stood. Not for me, for her. I put my right hand over hers, the hand with the mate mark, so that the amber warmth of it was against her knuckles. She looked down at it. I watched her face in the morning light that came through the watchtower window, the river light, amber and shifting, the light she had been working in for 2 nights. I want to tell you something, I said, quietly enough that it was between us rather than the hall. I have been Alpha King of Delvara for 20 years. I have made a great many decisions in that time, and I have been right about most of them. Last night, I almost went into the river after Kedron myself. She looked at me. I'm glad I didn't, I said, because if I had, I would have found him and I would have brought him in and I would have done it adequately. I know the current well enough, but I would not have known what I know now. I would not have watched you make the decision about the rope. It was the right knot for the job, she said again, but softer now. Yes, I said, it was. Outside, the Delvara River was running lower, the worst of the flood retreating to its bed. In the reed banks the morning birds were beginning their calls, the quick, clear notes that meant the water was settling, that the marshes were finding their shape again. I could hear them through the tower window, the ordinary sounds of a southern morning, and they seemed somehow more themselves than they had before. Myra's hand in mine was steady. Not trembling, she was not a woman given to trembling, I was already beginning to understand. Just steady, the same steadiness she brought to everything. The Settlement Council will need to formalize the lunar recognition, I said. There will be papers and seals and a ceremony, probably next week, when the flood work is done. There are people in the settlements who will need time to. They'll manage, she said simply. Yes, I said, they will. I looked at Varath. He had the expression of a man doing careful and somewhat painful arithmetic. He met my eyes, and whatever he found there settled the last of his calculation, and he bowed not the shallow bow of a council elder to a person he outranked, but a real one, the kind you gave to a Luna. Myra didn't watch him do it. She was looking at the window, at the river light. Kedron will want his broth, she said. I haven't forgotten, I said. He'll pretend he doesn't need help getting up. He does. He'll need someone to put a hand under his chest. I'll do it. You'll have to be patient, he's proud. I know, I said. I've known him for 38 years. She turned back to look at me with the expression of someone who is, very quietly, recalibrating again, this time in a direction that was not caution or measurement, but something warmer. Something that had the particular quality of a person, beginning to realize they might trust this after all. All right, she said. I will not pretend the weeks after the flood were simple. Lunar recognition is a formal process in the Delvara Pack, and there are those who will always have objections to things that confound the categories they have sorted the world into, and Myra confounded a great many of them. A woman without rank, no pack mark, no bloodline that anyone in the council could trace to the right pages of the right record books. A flood walker. Someone's problem, in most people's estimation, being passed along from settlement to settlement. There were 3 formal objections filed with the council in the first week. I answered all 3 personally, in writing, and I was thorough. The objections were withdrawn. What no one had accounted for, in making their objections, was Kedron. Kedron had his warm broth in the morning, as she had instructed, and he needed the hand under his chest to get up the first 2 days, as she had predicted. By the 3rd day he was getting himself up, and by the end of the week he was sleeping with his head at the foot of her chair rather than mine, which in 19 years of his life he had done for no one except my father. I had a border watch captain who had spent 2 years writing reports that referred to her as the Flood Walker, and who now went out of his way to address her correctly, and with a punctuality that had something slightly guilty in it. I had a settlement council that, if not enthusiastic, was at least scrupulously formal. I had Pell, who had bitten 3 handlers, Pell, who for 6 years had tolerated no human touch. On the morning of the formal Luna ceremony, which took place at the river's edge as I had always intended, with the southern reed banks and the amber morning light, and the assembled pack and all the settlement witnesses, Pell walked up beside Myra before the ceremony began and sat down next to her, and leaned against her leg with the total physical confidence of a wolf who had decided this was simply where he belonged. She looked down at him, she scratched behind his ear, he closed his eyes. Elder Varath, who was standing directly across from her in the ceremony ring, saw this. I watched his face. I watched the last of his administrative certainty about how this should have gone, the last of his objection, leave him. He had grown up with the pack. He knew what it meant when Pell sat down next to you. The ceremony was brief. A Luna recognition in the Southern pack tradition is a straightforward thing. 3 words in the old formal tongue, the Alpha's hand over the Lunas, the mark witnessed, the pack assembled. What makes it what it is who stands up. Everyone stood up. The settlement representatives, the border watch, the council, the river workers who had known her for years from the floods and had never spoken to her directly because she had no rank and therefore no claim on their attention. They stood up. Myra held my hand and watched them do it with the quiet, steady attention she brought to everything, and I felt the mark on my wrist burning warm and certain, the way it had burned since that second night at the river, and I thought about how many times in 38 years I had wondered what it was waiting for. It was waiting for the woman who tied the rope through the old wolf's collar. It was waiting for the woman who went back into the fast water one more time for the difficult wolf, the one who bit, the one nobody wanted to handle because he was there and needed to come in. It was waiting for her to not ask whose wolves they were and not ask for anything back. That is the only test the mark had ever been running. I understand it now. It had been running it for 38 years and patient as stone, and it found what it needed on a mud bank in the amber dark of a flooded summer night, and it woke. The broth she brought Kedron every morning for the first 2 weeks was a recipe that came, she told me, from the first Bend settlement, river fish and dried marshreed root, simmered slow, no salt, good for old joints and tired kidneys. I watched her make it once and I did not watch again because it was clearly a private thing, her and the old wolf in the small fire, and I did not need to be in the middle of it. What I needed was to be the king, who had made sure she was allowed to be there without someone filing an objection. I could manage that part. We walked the flood damage survey together the 3rd week, the levee repair schedule, the reed bank assessment, the patrol route rerouting. She knew the southern border better than anyone I had in my council. She had been walking it for years, in the storms and the floods and the heat season risings, going where the water was and bringing things out. My maps were out of date in 3 places. She told me which 3. I had the cartographer correct them. You're very calm about this, she said to me, on the evening of the 3rd day of the survey. We were at the East Reed Island, Kedron's island, the one she'd crossed the fast channel to reach, and the river here was low now, back within its banks, the reed bed standing again in the amber late-day light. The island was small and flat and unremarkable, a piece of ground you would not look at twice if you did not know what had happened on it. She was looking at it. About what? I said. All of this. She gestured not specifically, just outward at the settled weight of things. The council, the ceremony, the fact that a month ago I was the flood walker and now I am whatever I am now. Luna of the Delvara pack, I said. That, she paused, I expected more difficulty. There was difficulty, I said. I addressed it. She looked at me sideways. You addressed it in writing. I was thorough. She almost smiled. Not quite. Myra's smiles were things that arrived by degrees, and this one was at an early degree, but it was there. The objectors withdrew. They did. All three. All three, I agreed. I can provide the correspondence if you'd like to read it. Are you proud of it? I thought about this honestly. Yes, I said, somewhat. The third one I'm particularly pleased with. The almost smile went 1 degree further. You wrote 3 letters defending my right to be Luna. I did. Because the mark woke. Because the mark woke, I said, and also because you carried Kedron out of that channel on a rope you had tied through his collar so that he would surface if you didn't. The mark woke because of who you are, Myra. The letters were about who you are. They were not difficult to write. She was quiet for a moment. The river ran past the island in the amber evening, lower and quieter than it had been in weeks, the reed bed standing in the late-day gold. Somewhere upriver a wolf called once, and another answered, and then the evening settled back into its sounds. I've been thinking, she said, about the rope. The rope. I tie it that way whenever the current is fast and I'm going after something heavy. It's a practical choice. I wasn't making a statement about my own life. I was making sure the animal came out. I know, I said. You made it sound very significant. It is significant. It's a knot. It's a knot you tie, I said, and the next person who ties the same kind of knot in the same situation will make a different calculation about which end is secured to what. The knot tells me what you calculate in a fast current with no time to think. I paused. I like what you calculate. She looked at the river, at the island, at the place where she had stood with Kedron's collar in her hand and made a decision about rope. Then she said, in the same quiet, even tone she brought to everything, I think I'm going to be glad about this. It was not a romantic declaration. It was not the speech a woman makes in a ceremony. It was the assessment of a person who has been running a careful accounting for several weeks and has arrived, with measured certainty, at a conclusion. It was the best thing I had ever heard. Good, I said. The evening came down around us, warm and amber and full of the sounds of the reed beds, and Kedron, who had followed us on the survey at a respectful distance all day, because he refused to be left behind even now, padded up quietly and settled himself between us with the weight and certainty of a wolf who had decided where he belonged. I thought about 20 years of ruling this kingdom. I thought about 38 years of carrying a mark that never told me anything. I thought about a woman standing at the edge of a dark river in the middle of the worst flood in a decade, tying a rope through a wolf's collar before she waded in, asking nothing, expecting nothing, doing the right thing for the right reason in the dark when she thought no one was watching. She had been wrong about that last part. Someone had been watching. I had been watching, and I would not stop. Kedron lived to see his 20th winter, as she had said he would. He slept at the foot of her chair for the remaining year of his life, and on the morning he did not wake, she was the one who found him, and she sat with him for a long time before she called for anyone. I did not disturb her. There are some things that are between a wolf and the person he chose, and the rest of the world, even a king, waits outside. The settlement council's maps were corrected in 3 places, as she had told me they should be. Elder Vareth retired the following spring and sent us a gift, a very good length of braided rope, river grade, which I suspect he had thought about for some time before sending. I kept it.